Protecting children in a pandemic is a must. Education is vital, but so is preventing violence and sexual abuse. Their mental state is also at risk in isolation. This point in time could map out the rest of their lives. UNICEF warns the crisis could push up to 86 million more children into poverty by the end of the year. It also expects a spike in child labor. What sort of future would you want for your kid? Well, this crisis has been an inconvenience for many of us. For others, it's been horrific and could set some children back for the rest of their lives. I'll talk to an expert about that in a moment. First, this report.
It's a tense evening in Nairobi's Kibera district. An ambulance has brought a weak elderly man back to the village who has supposedly tested negative for the coronavirus. But many here suspect that he's still sick. It's not entirely clear what his status is, but people are worried enough to force the ambulance to take him back to the hospital. Officially, there have been around 11,000 cases in Kenya so far, which is relatively low, but there's widespread fear of a major outbreak. Schools have been closed because of the coronavirus, a potentially devastating blow to the future of the younger generation here. Mothers like Sophia Ashihundu can't homeschool their children. The family has no laptop, tablet, or computer, and the power is often out anyway.
I can't check their answers. I didn't go to school, so instead they go to the neighbors who do that for me.
Sophia's 14-year-old daughter, Sheila, gets up at 6 in the morning to do her homework. She waits eagerly for school lessons to begin on the screen at her neighbor's house.
Sometimes I just lose hope because we don't have anything. We don't have a father. My mother is struggling for us. I need to learn further so that I can help him in the next life. I don't want him to suffer like this. I want, when I grow up, I want to be the best surgeon so that I can help my mother.
Sheila's frightened of missing too many lessons, so she goes round to study at her neighbors whenever they're at home.
Their body and also to build their muscles.
Since the beginning of the crisis, the government has been working with the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, to expand remote learning school programs. It's an attempt to avert the worst, says UNICEF's Jane Ann Kiviu.
Even before COVID, the learning crisis, was very high in education, where children are not able to achieve the learning outcomes that they need to achieve at a particular age. And you can imagine, plus the COVID, then these learning outcomes even becomes, the achievement of the same becomes a problem.
I want to know whether
If the power fails and the signal cuts out, then Sheila simply has to miss out on the class, which is frustrating. But remote schooling at least offers some sense of stability during the crisis. This is also the reason why Sophia Hassan invites round as many as 10 kids a day to use her TV in the Kibera district. She wants to protect them from another kind of threat during the crisis.
It is important in that, here in Kibera, there's so many cases of violence, domestic violence, rape. So I'm trying my best to put them together so that they don't go and involve themselves there.
There are many like Sophia Hassan trying to help others. They're the backbone of Nairobi's Kibera quarter. People who won't give up, no matter how long the crisis lasts.
And let's bring in the chairwoman of Save the Children Germany, Susanne Krüger. Susanne, children were labelled super spreaders when this crisis hit. Where's that put kids now?
Look, when it comes to children, the symptoms of COVID are usually mild, right? And in the beginning, everybody thought, well, this is not something that will affect children very much. But although children are not particularly affected by the virus, they are heavily impacted by the secondary and social effects. School closings, for example, lockdowns that put families under pressure. And these changes are quite dramatic and life-changing for children everywhere right now, be it in the US, be it in Germany, be it in Bangladesh, South Africa, or Europe. And what we also see everywhere, it's the most poor and the most vulnerable that are particularly hit the most. And we will see an increased inequality and an increased poverty in months and years to come.
What about the extreme examples? Is there evidence to show an increase in violence against children and forced child labour?
Yeah, there are many examples. Let me start with protection issues. The UN has described violence as a shadow pandemic coinciding with COVID right now. And we have 243 million girls and women that have been subjected to sexual and physical violence. And the UN says for every 3 months, this lockdown continues globally, an extra 15 million cases we will have every 3 months. And that's quite a number. And the last 2 decades have actually seen, in terms of child labor, 94 million fewer children in child labor. But now, that is a remarkable development, right? But now this development is under threat because families are under pressure. When there's a lockdown, they cannot go to work. That means children and also their parents go hungry. So children are subjected to work. And evidence about child labor rising as schools are closing is actually gradually mounting. Just right now, we have, like in terms of numbers that you can see, it's like 152 million children at the moment that are working as child laborers, 73 million approximately in hazardous conditions. And now what COVID does, it's on the rise for the first time since 2000.
Susanna, what about where the kids are meant to be, school? What's it doing to their educations?
We have an education crisis, and what that actually means, maybe I tell you a story from a boy that is from one of our programs in South Africa, and he's living in one of the townships, and Save the Children works there with the families. And you know, the school's closed, and the parents don't have internet at home, so this boy cannot open his email in the morning and learn. And then the parents have only one mobile phone. And so if the father is leaving the house, for example, this mobile phone cannot be used by this boy for learning. So this is the reality on the ground for many, many kids, and they are losing out on education.
Tell me, though, what's stopping these kids just catching up once the crisis is over?
Well, you see, we can learn from example from Sierra Leone, where Save the Children and other organizations have long-time experience what it means for girls to be out of school. In Sierra Leone, during the Ebola crisis, there were 9 months that was total school closure. And by the end of these 9 months, over 10% of all the girls in the country never ever entered school again because they were married off, or it was culturally acceptable by then to stay at home and not to resume their education.
Susanna, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much for being on our show. Chairwoman of Save the Children Germany,
Thank you.
Susanna Kreuger. Thank you
so much.
Over to our science correspondent, Derek Williams. He's been looking into some of the questions you've been sending us on the coronavirus.
Is there evidence that COVID-19 can be transmitted via feces?
This has been a background worry all along since COVID-19 transmission via what's known as the fecal-oral route would have major implications for caregivers all over the world, as well as for wastewater management. Although it's clear that the majority of infections occur via respiratory droplets and aerosols, it appears that transmission of the virus might at least also be theoretically possible through excrement. A couple of studies have managed to culture live virus from patient fecal samples. Like with most questions, though, when you start to look into them, things get more complicated than they appear. I read an interesting new article that helped bring home to me the complex infection paths that pathogens can take in the fecal-oral route as they circulate through a population. But when it came to COVID-19, the authors didn't really make any new claims. They remained very much in the realm of hypothesis. And most experts continue to say that in general, the live virus doesn't really survive passage through the gut.
Some researchers have reported finding the virus in sewage from samples taken as long ago as early 2019. Can you please elaborate on that?
Though generally it seems to no longer be viable after passage through the gut, SARS-CoV-2's genetic material can remain intact enough to be detectable in feces. The only report that I've seen claiming the virus had been found in wastewater collected in early 2019 was a Spanish study that's still in peer review. In it, scientists from Barcelona said their tests had detected coronavirus RNA in a single sample from March of last year. But there's a lot of skepticism that that result is correct. Many experts think the sample was likely contaminated in the lab. And there's no way to repeat the test since the available sample from March that supposedly tested positive was apparently used up in the initial test. Studies that use SARS-CoV-2's rate of mutation to predict when it first emerged generally trace it back to an ancestor from late 2019, not 8 or 9 months earlier.